This is the video lecture screen capture for Unit 5, Animal Tissues for Biology 101. It covers Chapter 20 in Campbell's Biology. And one of the first things that I want to stress in this unit is the tie-in between structure and function, how those are connected. One of the things you should walk away from this class with is the idea that when you see a structure on some organism, that it should provide for some specific function. I've got a couple of examples, and this would be seen with just about every organism that I can think of in many different ways. But I have an image of a mole, and I pulled this off the internet, and the URL is here if you want to go and take a look at it. You see this image of this mole protruding from the ground through the dirt that apparently has pushed up out of the ground, and you notice that you don't see any eyes. It does actually have eyes, but they're covered with the fur. It has this bare nose and these very large front feet, if you want to call them that, and long claws on them comparatively, and the feet are disproportionately large for the size of this mole in comparison to other animals, but they fit the function. And supposedly when a specimen of mole, a preserved specimen, was taken back to Europe and Crolus Linnaeus saw it, he named it Scalopus aquaticus. And when you think of Scalopus aquaticus, you probably think of some creature that would live in the water. Crolus Linnaeus wasn't told that it actually lived in the ground. He just looked at it and thought for sure, with these large feet, it paddled through the water. Well, he followed the rules of taxonomy that are observed today, and so that name has stuck, even though it really doesn't properly describe the mole. But you can see the connection between structure and function, and it appears that moles would sniff out worms and use the end of their nose to kind of nose ahead. And you see the structure of that. Some actually have star-like projections from the end of their nose. Another example would be a giant squid. These are interesting organisms. Actually belong to a group of animals called mollusks because they have a mantle. That's one of the characteristics of the mollusks, which includes snails and clams and oysters and slugs. One of the things that I point out here specifically is the eye. The eye of the squid is supposed to be the largest eye in the world, according to some sources. I guess larger than some whales, but they say it can be the size of a beach ball. And the giant squids that live in the deep sea are thought to be upwards of 60 feet. The largest one recorded was, I think, 43 feet from the end of the two tentacles to the fins on the other end. The large eye is supposed to be a complex structure, especially for a mollusk, and compared to other animals, even so. And the size of it would help to explain them living in the deep where there's less light and being able to see the bioluminescent creatures that they might feed upon. The scientists around the world have not had the opportunity to view very many giant squid. There have been some that have washed up on the beach. There was an article recently, I think National Geographic, that showed one being pulled up along the edge of a boat. And if I remember correctly, it was over 30 feet long. But they have found the beaks of the squid in the stomachs of whales. And from the beak size, they've got an idea that some of them may well be over 60-some feet long. Generally, they measure the mantle to give them an idea of relative size, because a lot of times when they wash up on the beach, the tentacles have been damaged, destroyed, or broken off. We've talked about tissues in Unit 1, if I remember correctly, and tissues are a group of cells that work together for a common good or function. And you can go back and review the organization of living organisms within the organism as far as cells, tissues, organs, organ systems, and the organism. The four types of tissue that we find in animals I have listed here: epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous tissue. Those four types. At some colleges you might study 6 types, but here at KC and many other colleges and universities, we just narrow it down to 4. And the first one I talk about is epithelial tissue. And with epithelial tissue, you want to think of it as covering body surfaces, both inner and outer body surfaces and organs. It covers the skin, which is the largest organ of the body. It covers our internal organs, heart, lungs, liver, spleen, the digestive system, inside and out, covered with epithelial cells. From mouth to anus, epithelial cells. So there's a lot of epithelial tissue in the body. Some descriptive terms that we want to understand. If you talk about simple epithelial cells, simple squamous cells, for instance, that means you have a single layer. Stratified means more than one layer. You'd have 2 or more layers of cells. I have an example here of stratified squamous epithelium. I pulled this illustration off, or this image off the internet. This tissue has been stained, so you see different colors in it. At least 2 different stains were used. And they're showing the stratified squamous epithelial cells, and this appears to be from an esophagus, which makes sense that there'd be a little bit of rubbing going down the esophagus, and the cells would be sloughed off in the process. But the cells are produced down here near the bottom, and they're pushed upwards, and as they're pushed upwards, especially near the surface, they tend to flatten. And that is one of the characteristics of squamous cells, and it's stratified because of the many layers. The squamous cells, that's a type of epithelial tissue. I've shown that. There's both simple and stratified. Another type of epithelial tissue would be columnar. It's called columnar because it's column-shaped. These cells are elongated, and these would usually line passages where there's not much chance that they're going to be sheared off and damaged, because they're not so easily replaced as what the squamous cells would be, the stratified squamous cells. You find these inside the digestive system. The intestines would be a good example. And you can see the nucleus in each of these columnar cells. Cuboidal cells would be another type of epithelial tissue, and I have a cross-section of a tube that has cuboidal cells surrounding it, and a longitudinal section that has a cuboidal cells that would surround the tube. A lot of times kidneys are used as an example because these are found in the tubules of kidneys, helping to line them. And you can see that they're somewhat cubed shape, not perfect cubes. I generally say that they're rectangular in shape because a square is rectangular. Three-dimensionally, it'd be box-like, not necessarily cubes. These would be simple cuboidal cells. There are stratified cuboidal cells, but I don't have any examples to show you. As I mentioned earlier, skin contains epithelial tissue, and it's the largest organ of the body. It contains all 4 types of tissues. It contains epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous tissue. And I have a cross-section of skin, and if we start at the outermost surface, this would be called the epidermis of skin. Underneath that would be the dermis, and then underneath that would be the subcutaneous tissue. The epidermis contains the epithelial cells that we've been talking about. The outermost cells are dead, which is interesting because when you're looking at somebody, you're looking at a lot of dead cells, but our culture puts a lot of stock in those dead cells and spends a lot of money and attention on dead material. Just underneath the epidermis, you see some muscle tissue. There's an erector pili muscle, which helps to pull on the shaft of the hair follicle, the hair which would extend out of the skin, and when this muscle pulls on this, it helps the hair to stand up, and that's what causes people to have the goose flesh or goose pimples, or goosebumps as they're sometimes referred to as, and the hair to stand up. We do this when we're cold or if we're under great stress or fear. You see it in animals, especially dogs or cats. The hair on the back of their neck and shoulders stands up. It's just an an automatic response to when they're agitated. They don't think about it, it just happens. You also notice the blood vessels. There are small veins and small arteries that end in the capillaries between the two. And if you scrape your skin, sometimes you'll see blood. That's generally coming from the capillaries. If you see clear fluid, that would be lymph, which surrounds the capillaries, and that's how nutrients and oxygen flows from the blood into that lymph, which is relatively clear, and then to the living cells around it. As the epithelial cells are produced in the skin and they're pushed to the outside, they move further away from this nutritious lymph, and they end up dying. They become keratinized. Extra protein is dumped into them, and they become tougher. Notice that there are sweat glands and nerves that are associated with the dermis, and just in the subcutaneous tissue there would be adipose tissue, which we'll talk about later on. Collagen is important in the skin, and that collagen changes in characteristic as we age. One of the things we look at when we look at a person is to determine how old they are or their health, much by their skin. We notice that an older person will have wrinkles, a younger person lacks those wrinkles, and the explanation for some of that is the collagen fibers lose their elasticity as a person ages, and so lines will develop on the face, crow's feet around the eyes and around the nose and the mouth. And there are things that happen to a person that will increase the speed at which that collagen doesn't respond as it did when a person's younger. Smoking, drug use, alcohol use, and especially UV exposure, UV rays. I have an image of a person here. This is interesting. I'm not sure how this was done, but on this woman's face you see clear skin, looks young, and on the other part of the face you see the wrinkles and you see the aging that occurs and the coloration of the skin. And this does increase and progresses faster for people who expose their skin to UV rays, whether they tan in tanning parlors or they spend a lot of time out in the sun. The melanocytes are down near the basement membrane, as it's sometimes called, the basal cells of the epithelial tissue and the epidermis. And the melanocytes produce a pigment called melanin, which gives color to the skin. And if the color is homogeneous across the skin, that gives general color to the skin. More melanin, darker the skin. If it's just occurring in spots, then those would be freckles. And I think I've got an image here of a woman that has freckles across her face because she has these spots of extra melanin that are laid down. And they are stimulated by the sun, and they do become darker. More melanin is produced if exposed to UV rays, not just sun, but UV in general. In this illustration right here, you can see the melanocytes and then melanin that's dumped into the melanocytes. When the skin is exposed to UV rays, say if a person is sunburned, that means there was not enough melanin in their skin to block the dangerous UV rays that change the chromosomal structure, the DNA structure in the cells. And so a protective mechanism is for the melanocytes to produce melanin and dump that into the cells so they darken, and the skin will become red. It will darken with the sunburn in lighter skinned people. And if the person does not re-expose himself or herself to the UV rays, then the skin lightens as those cells are pushed up towards the surface and sloughed off. If there's repeated exposure, then the skin gets darker and darker, or at least stays dark. I have an image of carcinoma. That is the term for cancer of epithelial cells. I don't know if this person was exposed to the sun, smoked, used some kind of a tobacco product, or a combination of those. It's understood that those would contribute to carcinoma.